Though I walk through the midst of trouble, this is going to sound a lot like Psalm 23. Though I walk through the midst of trouble, you preserve my life. You stretch out your hand against the wrath of my enemies, and your right hand delivers me. In verse 8, here it comes again, God's loyal love. The Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your loyal love, your steadfast love, your love and faithfulness, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake. David is referring to himself here. Do not forsake the work of your hands. God, you've given me a purpose, and I'm going to use it for your glory. So God, do great things in my life, because when you do great things in me, you get the credit. When you do great things through me, you get the credit. When you do great things around me, God, you get the credit. I don't get that kind of credit. David says, I can walk through the deep troubles. I can walk through the dark valleys, because here's one thing I know. God's hand is powerful enough to rescue me. God's arm is always long enough to reach me and to save me, no matter what kind of mess I find myself in. And David says, he preserves me. He's going to deliver me. David knows with a rock-solid certainty he's got my back. And because he's got my back, I am not at all worried about what life is going to throw at me. David knows his purpose, and he knows his purpose is God's purpose for his life. And so when David passionately pursues God's purpose, when David passionately pursues his purpose, he is passionately pursuing God's purpose. Some of you, I don't even need to tell you this, some of you in this room are never going to be great scientists, right? It's obvious by your grades. You're just not going to be a great scientist. Some of you, like me, will never be outstanding at math. I struggled to make it through my stats courses when I was in school. I'm never going to be great at math. I don't try to be great at math. I'm not attempting to be a great scientist, because that's just really not what God's plan for me is. But I do know what he's calling me to do. And because I know what he's calling me to do, I can get up in the morning and I can passionately pursue it, and I can hold nothing back, because I know by following what he's calling me to do, he alone is getting the glory. Here's what I want you to hear from me, every one of you in this room. God is glorified when you come alive knowing his purpose for you, and when you passionately pursue it. And when you're passionately pursuing it, nothing and no one should be able to throw you off of the trail. Let me give you one more quote from Augustine, then I'm going to wrap up with a story real quick. Augustine, if you can't figure it out by now, he is one of my hero in the faith. He said this. He said, let the enemies rage against me. What can they do? They can take my money. They can strip me. They can banish me. They can afflict me with grief and torture. At last, Augustine says, if God allows it, they can kill me. And then this great man of faith said, but they can do no more than that, because I am right in the middle of God's will. He's got me in the palm of his hand. His arm is long enough to rescue me. December of 1944 was considered by some to be one of the most tenuous moments in American military history. The American forces had already landed on the beaches of D-Day in June of that year. They had already started to push the Nazis out of France, and they had started to make their way through this forest, the Hurtgen Forest in Belgium. And Hitler knew, if I don't stop them now, the entire Third Reich, my 1,000-year plan, is at stake. Pour everything that you've got into the American forces in this little patch of woods in Belgium. So Hitler took his entire Western army and he focused it all at one point in the Hurtgen Forest. 3 American divisions are in those forests. And in December of 1944, 3 American divisions hold off millions of Germans, infantry and artillery and tanks. They hold on by their fingernails, as they get completely surrounded. The military historians refer to this battle as the Battle of the Bulge. And the reason why it's referred to as the Battle of the Bulge is because the Nazi forces completely surround the Americans and they have them engulfed on every side. There's this little bulge of American forces completely surrounded by the Nazis. The commander of all Allied forces, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, looks to one of America's greatest generals in military history and says, if somebody doesn't get there, if somebody doesn't recognize or somebody doesn't rescue them, they're going to be annihilated. General Dwight D. Eisenhower turns to George S. Patton and says, how quickly can you turn your entire Third Army and move them to the Hurtgen Forest? How quickly can you get to the bulge and rescue those Americans? And Patton says something that nobody in the room believes. In fact, Ike and General Omar Bradley laugh in Patton's face and say, it's impossible. George Patton says, I can take 250,000 American soldiers, tanks, artillery, and all of our equipment, and I can get them there in 48 hours. Literally, Dwight D. Eisenhower says to Patton, impossible, can't be done. No army on the planet can do what you're claiming to do. This is a 5 to 7 day thing, not a 48-hour thing. And Patton, in absolute confidence, says, oh no, I can get my army there in as little as 48 hours. And Eisenhower says, you do that and we win this war. If you can't get them there in a matter of days, we're annihilated, and perhaps all of us in this room speak German. George S. Patton writes a letter to his wife on December 21st, 1944. His wife's name is Beatrice. And whether you know it or not, Old Blood and Guts has this rock-solid faith in God. See, when he was a soldier in World War I, he was wounded and should have been killed. And every doctor said, that dude should be dead. And he miraculously survives the wounds, really almost unheard of. He's able to heal completely and become one of America's greatest generals. Here's what George S. Patton says, December 21st, 1944, to his wife Beatrice. He says, destiny sent for me in a hurry when things got really tight. And then he says this to his wife, perhaps God saved me. Perhaps God spared my life in World War I for this very effort. George Patton does something that nobody believes is possible. In 48 hours, his Third Army shows up to the bulge and rescues those American forces, ultimately defeats the Germans. And the reason why you and I are a free country today is because this man had this rock-solid faith in God's purpose for his life. God put me on earth to be a great warrior, George Patton would say, and I'm going to go for it with all that I've got. Now, I don't know you, don't know what you've been through in life, don't have any clue what's in front of you. But I do know this. When you can say like Patton, when you can say like David, I know God's purpose for me, and I'm passionately pursuing it. When you can say that, you've got nothing to worry about. What can the world do to you as they rage against you when you know you're right in the palm of God's hands? When you know his arm is strong enough to preserve you or protect you, what can the world throw at you that God cannot give you the strength to endure and use you in great ways?